This morning, power, responsibility and the truth. Boris Johnson had power and is still screaming that he has lost it. As he quit, he claimed his disgrace is in fact all someone else's fault. Yet it's his apparent inability to tell the whole truth that has again led him to trouble. His response, to chuck angry rocks at Parliament and the Prime Minister. Moves seemingly designed to embarrass and to enrage. Yet only 2 of his allies so far have followed him to the exit. Maybe it's not so much a master plan, more an epic strop. But fan or foe, Boris Johnson has defined our times, a man with an enormous ability to create and to destroy, whose enemies can never truly be sure he's gone. So what does his decision to walk mean now for the Conservatives? And does it really matter to the country anymore? Grant Shapps ran Boris Johnson's first successful campaign to become Prime Minister. Still in the Cabinet as Energy Secretary, he's with us live. Alongside Labour's David Lammy, who wants Boris Johnson's old job as Foreign Secretary. We'll hear too from Nigel Farage, whose desire to leave the European Union pushed the Tories further and further on Brexit. And our first big interview with the new First Minister of Scotland, Humza Yousaf, after a rocky start in charge. And to make sense of this bout of madness, Alan Cumming, performer, presenter, producer of a new smash hit who swapped Broadway for our big desk, political scoop grabber Isabel Oakeshott, and the former leader of the Conservative Party, Michael Howard, who once sacked Boris Johnson for lying. Morning to all of you. You're very welcome to be with us. We'll chat about Alan's show a bit later in the programme, but of course to politics and the papers first. Most of the front pages feature Boris Johnson, but with quite different takes. Let's have a look. The Sunday People says, "Boris, I'll be back," whereas the Mirror leads on Keir Starmer's demand for a general election. But look at this variation. The Mail says it's war, there's a duel for the soul of the Tories. But the Sunday Times says that allies are abandoning Boris Johnson as a Tory mutiny falls flat. So what is really going on this morning? Isabel, I know you've been working the phones. What are you hearing?
Well, it is a kind of toxic cesspool of claim and counterclaim this morning. What is clear is that Boris Johnson and his allies believe that they have been systematically misled, lied to again and again and again by Downing Street about that list of nominations for peerages. They allege very strongly, obviously they're not going on the record with it now, that several of the names that they had been assured were on that list and were put forward to the nominations committee that has the power to say yes or no, were actually secretly removed from the list without their knowledge and never actually made it through the process. And that all these months they have been duped by Number 10. That is staunchly denied this morning. Key figure in all of this, one James Forsyth, Rishi Sunak's political secretary, used to be his wife, Allegra Stratton, played a key role in the Partygate scandal, taking the fall for that.
And he was a prominent political journalist, but then went to work for Rishi Sunak in Number 10. So as you describe it, a toxic cesspool. Yeah. Now, Alan, people might not have seen The Good Wife, but in The Good Wife, which is an American political drama, you play Eli Gold, who's a sort of dastardly spin doctor.
Yes.
What would he and what do you make of all of this?
This would be tough even for Eli. I think though what Eli would do, as I think a lot of the Tories are doing, is back away from the crazy toxic pool cesspit. There's nothing to be done. I mean, I think it seems like Boris, this is finally the end of the line. And when you see them starting to eat their own, you know something's really going down.
So they're eating their own children, Michael Howard. I mean, as you know a thing or two about trying to control a very unhappy Tory party. What do you make of it? I mean, are you just shaking your head in distress?
No, look, government is full of bumps in the road.
It's a bit more than that, isn't it?
As Harold once said a very long time ago, events nearby events. I would urge Conservative members of Parliament, all of them, to remember that there's an election a year away and that they have a choice between uniting behind the Prime Minister and doing everything they can to win that election, or facing the fact that the country will be led by someone who at the last election urged everyone to make Jeremy Corbyn our Prime Minister.
But what Boris Johnson's supporters would say is, look, he was the guy who won us a huge majority. He is the person who can connect with voters around the country. Do you feel that it is a loss for the party for him to walk away, however messy it is?
Boris had many achievements to his credit, and there's no doubt about that. It's his decision to walk away. It's his decision to leave the House of Commons, and he will have to face the consequences of that decision.
Wasn't that victory, I mean, we need to talk about the fact that he just lies constantly. That victory was based on lies. Brexit is based on lies that he's told. I mean, I just think that we've got to be more frank about this, that this is someone who is a compulsive liar, who was leading our country for years.
I think we've got to be more frank and acknowledge, Michael, that this is a lot more than a bump in the road for the Tories.
Right.
The idea that Boris Johnson is now going to just shuffle off, go and be a dad, you know, changing nappies for the next year and a half till the next election. That is an absolute fantasy, I'm afraid. There are big showdowns to come over whether or not he tries to get back into Parliament. Does the party machine try to stop that happening?
Well, we will see, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes with Grant Shapps. And of course, Boris Johnson is always adamant that he has told the truth. So thank you, all three of you, for now. It is worth saying that we did invite Mr. Johnson to come and explain his exit this morning, but neither he nor any of his well-known backers wanted to come and account for what's going on. One minister, in response, described them as cowardly piglets, unwilling to defend their actions. So peace and harmony reigns. We'll see in a second what one of Mr. Johnson's old backers and still cabinet minister thinks of this finale of someone who was once called a rock star politician.
Anyone would think he likes the attention.
That person cannot be me. I and we will never take your support for granted. I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home. I have been repeatedly assured since these allegations emerged that there was no party, hand on heart, that I did not lie to the House. I want you to know how sad I am to be giving up the best job in the world. But them's the breaks.
Them's the breaks. Well, the Tories now have to face those breaks, now facing 3 by-elections with the likelihood of a 4th in Scotland before too long. Let's talk to Grant Shapps. Welcome to the studio. Now, Boris Johnson claimed dramatically on Friday that he'd been found guilty by what he called a kangaroo court in his explosive statement leaving Parliament. Do you agree that the committee looking at him was a kangaroo court?
First of all, I should say I haven't seen the report, nor have other MPs. Only Boris has seen that because he was sent an advanced copy of it. I think it's quite important to actually respect the institutions of Parliament. This isn't the government, this is Parliament itself coming to a decision.
So it's not a kangaroo court. You wouldn't use those words.
I haven't seen what they've written, but I've got no particular reason to think that's the case. I do think that, you know, these committees are made up of balanced actually by parties, so there will be Conservatives on that panel.
Boris Johnson has also claimed that he is the victim of a witch hunt, which is a pretty dramatic word. Is he the victim of a witch hunt?
No, I don't think that's true. I really like Boris, and I work very closely with him, and I actually thought he had many qualities. You know, that Brexit was completely stuck, and he got through that. I thought with the pandemic, he was great with the vaccines. Getting this country vaccinated, very good in Ukraine. Many qualities. But I think people, both in the Conservative Party and outside, don't miss the drama of it all. What we've got now with Rishi Sunak in Downing Street is getting on with the job, Downing Street under new management, as it were, getting on with people's priorities.
But this is an important point. I mean, yes or no, do you think Boris Johnson is a victim?
Well, Boris has himself decided to step down. That is his own decision.
So he's not a victim?
I read what he said very carefully. He made that decision to step down. He would have been welcome to stay. As I say, you know, man of many qualities. I think a calmer period is what the country wants and what it's getting with Rishi Sunak in Downing Street as well.
But he also implies that the government is not a proper Conservative one. You've said he's not a victim. You've said it's not a kangaroo court. Is this a Conservative government?
I think we are doing the proper Conservative things, actually, the vast majority of the country want to see us do. I won't list the Prime Minister's priorities, because I know you'll stop me, but things like stopping the small boats, where the Prime Minister was just able to announce a 20% reduction, is a very Conservative thing to do against a Labour Party that votes against all the policies to stop the small boats.
But I think what's interesting about this then is it matters. Words in politics matter. And what you've basically said is that the things that Boris Johnson claims in his statement on Friday aren't true.
I just think that Boris is referring to a particular set of circumstances in which he was involved as Prime Minister. It's now gone on for a very long time afterwards, with the various different processes that we've all sort of lived through. I think the country really wants to move on, and they've got that with the priorities of, you know,
but
going
doesn't
for
the
growth.
country also want to hear politicians just actually be straight with them in a way that many people believe that Boris Johnson was not? If you think, as you've basically said this morning in your answers, that what Boris Johnson said on Friday wasn't true, can you just say that today?
Look, I just think that what Boris says is his perspective on things. You're asking me, do I think that's true? No, I don't think that. You know, I think we're following a fundamentally Conservative approach to the world. If we, you know, if Labour gets in, the same thing that's always happened with Labour in the past, higher unemployment in this country, every single
And we'll be
Labour
talking
government.
to the Labour Party
So
in
do
just
I
a
think
few
we're doing
minutes.
Conservative things?
But,
yes,
but
I do, because we've got low
you don't think what Boris Johnson said on Friday
unemployment.
was true. What about something else that's being said this morning? So Boris Johnson's allies claim all over the newspapers this morning, and Isabel Oakeshott has reported to us this morning, and I've also been told this morning by other sources, that Rishi Sunak's team removed names from the list of people he wanted to give places in the House of Lords some months ago. Is that true?
No. The list that came to him was the list that went to the House of Lords commission that looks at these things, called HALOC. HOLAC.
We can
yes.
debate the
I don't know
acronym.
quite how you pronounce it. And just to be clear here, it went to that committee. The committee would have to say if the Prime Minister removed anyone. The Prime Minister has exactly followed the very, very long-standing conventions of Prime Ministers who simply take the list, pass it on and receive it back.
But our viewers aren't daft, Mr. Shapps. My question was, did the Prime Minister's team remove names from the list some months ago, before it arrived with the Prime Minister in the last few days? Is that true?
No, the process is the list comes to the Prime Minister and goes to HOLAC, the Commission. They then make the recommendations. They would have to publish if the Prime Minister did not agree with those recommendations. You're asking me up front if he removed anyone. My understanding is no, and no again. He's followed exactly the convention that every Prime Minister
but
has
I'm
followed
asking
in the
you
past.
about his team, and this is a very specific question. Is it true that a member of the Prime Minister's team took several names off Boris Johnson's list of people he wanted to send to the House of Lords some months ago? I just want to get this on the record.
My understanding is no.
So that is also untrue.
As far as I'm aware, that's not true. The list went across the commission of the people who make those decisions, including, by the way, where it's they're the ones who do the vetting, as it were. And both the list has been published by Number 10 today, and this commission would need to say if the Prime Minister had changed it, and they haven't.
Well, thank you for responding to that specific claim on the record this morning. If Boris Johnson wanted to stand again as a Conservative MP, should he be allowed to?
Whether Boris Johnson would ever want to stand or not, I would never want to predict. Look, the party has very clear processes in place for anybody who wants to stand for the party. It would be entirely a matter for the party itself. I would think...
Oh, well, you're a very senior person in the party,
I've been party chairman, and what I can tell you
minister.
is that I think that's a pretty hypothetical point at the moment, because I don't think he is in the mindset to do that, and the party would have to obviously go through the usual process they would with anybody.
But some of his colleagues, Jacob Rees-Mogg, for example, this morning, says the party must allow him to stand again if he wasn't, or else there'll be civil war.
Well, look, there is no... I mean, as far as I know, he's just resigned, right? There is no kind of chance of him coming back and saying, right now I'm going to stand again. I think even
there is no chance of him coming back.
Well, from what I understand, even he said he doesn't want to do that. So we are, I think, rather in the realms of the hypothetical. No, not directly to me, but that's my understanding. And I think we're rather in the realms of the hypothetical. Look,
no, it's an important question, Grant Shapps, because there are people in the Conservative Party who would dearly love Boris Johnson to stand again. He himself very carefully in his statement has said, I'm leaving Parliament for now. So on a point of principle, should a Prime Minister who was booted out by his party, who was fined by the police, who it looks like a committee of MPs is going to say didn't tell the whole truth to the House of Commons, should that kind of person be allowed to stand as an MP for the Conservative Party?
I know you want to ask me the question in lots of different ways, and I think I've already answered it, which is simply to say there is a process which the CCHQ, the party HQ, would decide in the same way as they do with any other candidate. So you go through exactly the same process.
So it's possible that he might run again?
Yes, but I think we're rather in the realms of speculation here, and it would be up to the party to make that decision, not to the Prime Minister, not to Parliament, but the party itself.
Do you think more MPs will quit?
Look, again, very hard to predict the future. What I do know is that, as I said before, Boris has many qualities. I think people don't miss the drama. I think that Number 10 under new management is getting on with the priorities of the people, getting growth now, whilst we see Germany in recession, the Eurozone in recession.
So
one of his key pledges.
Standing by for a big exodus.
Look, again, the one thing I know about politics is very dangerous to predict the future. I do remember when I was party chairman back in, I think it was 2014, it was on really the eve of the 2015 election, we had members of Parliament quit and switch parties and these things, by-elections, many of which we didn't win. We still were able to go on and win the 2015 election. And you do that by doing what Rishi Sunak's doing, which is following the priorities of stopping the boats and growing the economy. And that is where we will be entirely focused.
Do you expect to lose seats, though, in the 3 by-elections on the way, with potentially another one as well?
Again, you're asking me to preempt the electorate.
I'm asking you if you think there's any reason why people would vote for you right now when our viewers look at what's going on and could perhaps be forgiven for thinking it's chaos.
I would think there are very strong reasons. For one thing, we've just seen this week, Labour say that they are or are not in favour of taxing £28 billion and spending it. They're in chaos on this is to do with their energy policy.
To them in a moment, but
that's
this is
fine.
about your party.
But this is an important point because people should know it would add £1,000 to their energy bill. They're following the Just Stop Oil approach to energy security in this country. And when you ask about these by-elections, we will be saying to people, look at what a Labour government would do. They'd follow Just Stop Oil. They'd leave unemployment higher, as they've always done in the past.
Just a second. I just want to ask you a final question. Why should our viewers have faith in the honour system that gives out gongs, sends people to the House of Lords to make them lawmakers, when they're people who've been implicated in the Partygate scandal, some of them are the Prime Minister's friends, and Liz Truss seems keen also to send her friends and supporters to Parliament, to the House of Lords? Why should our viewers look at that and think that's any way to run a system?
Well, first of all, there is this Appointments Commission which carries out vetting and makes sure that people are appropriate together. Secondly, actually, it will surprise your viewers, given what you've just said to me, that after a series of general election wins over many years and 56% Conservative MPs in the Commons, in the House of Lords, we only have about a third Conservative. So even after all these years, we don't have a majority in the House of Lords.
So you're trying to pack it with your supporters?
No. Well, by contrast, I think Gordon Brown, in his resignation list, appointed 50 new peers, 50 new people to the House of Lords. We've seen a very small list, actually, from this current list. I actually think the system, if anything, is a bit too slow to reflect the political realities of people voting in a particular direction. OK, Grant Shapps, thank you very much indeed for coming in. It's always great to have you with us. Well, what do you think? We'd love to hear what you made of Mr Shapps' comments, or what do you think about Boris Johnson's exit? As ever, send us an email. The address is there for you. Or if you're socially media inclined, you can use the hashtag BBC Laura K, and we'll try and share some of the conversation with you later in the show. And of course, there's always tons on the BBC website, which is there for you now. Well, Labour might be forgiven for just lapping it all up, but it's had a couple of problems of its own this week. David Lammy is here, the Shadow Foreign Secretary. Welcome to you.
Thank you.
Keir Starmer's calling for an election this morning. No surprise from an opposition leader. But if he really thinks the Tories are such a fiasco, why is the lead between the Tories and the Labour Party narrowing?
Look, what's happened over the last 48 hours is unprecedented. We have a former Prime Minister crafting a letter undermining the sitting Prime Minister, and we've got 3 by-elections brought about not in the usual way because an MP has passed away or there has been wrongdoing, but simply because these MPs want to put pressure on the current government. In those circumstances, of course there should be a general election. We are having this conversation in extraordinarily serious times. Inflation's running at 8.7%. We've got a cost of living crisis squeezing people's weekly budget, and we've got war in Europe. For all of those reasons, our country needs certainty as we head forward over the next 2 years, and that's why we're calling for a general election, and we will put our case to the British people as you would expect.
But my question is, if everything is all so terrible, if the Conservatives are doing such a terrible job, how do you then explain that in October the gap between Labour and the Conservatives was about 30, then in December it was about 20, and then now it's about 15? The trend is clear, the gap is narrowing. So why do you claim that it's all such a disaster? What is it about you
Laura,
that isn't persuading voters?
Laura, you would be better to put that question to a pollster. I'm not here to talk about polls. I'm here to talk about my day-to-day experience. When I speak to voters, they're raising cost of living, they're raising inflation, they're raising their mortgages, which have gone up as a result of this government. They're raising the fact that they can't get a GP appointment, and they're raising the big issues if they're waiting for cancer care in this country. Those are the issues, and for those reasons, of course, the Labour Party is ahead in the polls. But let us put our case to the British people, and they can determine the direction of this country.
Do you think there's really any chance you're going to get a general election? I mean, I think I've probably had almost as many hot dinners as the number of times I've heard an opposition leader say there must be a general election now. I mean, it's spin, isn't it? Keir Starmer's not going to get that.
It's actually very serious, because we're in serious times. Our country needs to move forward with a unified purpose. We've got war in Europe. We've got these terrible problems in people's everyday lives. And now we've got Rishi Sunak approving an honours list of people who bullied and people who were involved in Partygate, clearly weak as a result of a former Prime Minister doing his best to undermine him. For all of those reasons, let us have certainty and let us move forward. I don't say this with any glee. I say it because I genuinely believe in the interests of this country, we need certainty.
Let's talk about the honours system then. So you're clearly very unhappy with how the Conservatives have been using the honours system. Is it right, though, in principle, that Prime Ministers should be able to send allies, former staffers, to the House of Lords?
Look, after Grenfell Tower, where I lost a friend, Jacob Rees-Mogg said that the residents of that tower lacked common sense. I don't believe he is someone who should have been rewarded. Priti Patel was found to be bullying in her department. I don't believe she should be rewarded, and I don't believe that if a government sets rules for everybody else during a pandemic, it's right that those who encourage parties in Number 10 should be rewarded.
But I'm asking you about the principle here, though. You know, you've been clear, you don't approve of those specifics, but on principle, is it right that we have a system in this country where Prime Ministers can send their allies and friends to the House of Lords or give them gongs for whatever reason it appears they fancy?
The principle is founded on good faith, and we've had Prime Ministers that have abided by that good faith. The problem is at the moment is we have a lot of bad faith, and that's why you put the questions to Grant Shapps that you did.
So would Labour preserve then the honours system as it stands?
Of course we would preserve the honours system, because in Keir Starmer you have a man of incredible integrity, and I say that having known him for many, many years. Let us get back to good faith politics, where yes, we can work together, there can be consensus, but we're addressing the big issues of our time.
But I thought you wanted to get rid of the House of Lords. We'll certainly have a good old think about whether the system works. You just said you want to preserve the honours system.
Well,
we've
said that we want to preserve the honours system because we do believe that in this country, and I'm thinking of ordinary people in communities like mine that are rewarded for the work that they're doing, for example, for young people. But yes, it is our intention in the first term to address the issues of the democratic deficit in the House of Lords.
So scrapping House of Lords in the first term, I note there you've said that quite specifically. You say there Keir Starmer's a man of integrity who stands by his word. This week, though, actually, Labour has rather changed its word on what was meant to be one of your big flagship policies. Now, Rachel Reeves here in this studio has talked about the big green prosperity plan, spending £28 billion on that, moving to green energy, cleaning up factories, spending £28 billion each year. Except this week, she kind of shifted it forward a bit. She's changed her mind. Now, don't you want people to be able to trust you and know that when you say something as a party, you're going to stick to it?
Look, the British economy can only succeed if we win the race for clean energy. That means reforming and moving to renewables on solar, on wind, on nuclear, and of course it means the jobs of the future. The Japanese are spending 16 billion annually. The Germans are spending 19 billion annually. We are not currently in the race, but we're absolutely clear we've got to stick to our fiscal rules. Rachel Reeves set out those fiscal rules, that we want to see a reduction in deficit on the day-to-day spending, that we want to see a reduction in our debt, and of course we will only borrow to spend where we're investing in our economy. So we're sticking to those fiscal rules, and for that reason we will delay that 28 billion spend until the second half of the next Parliament if we win the next general election.
But what happens then if in 2026, 2027, the economy is actually still in dire straits and you still want to stick to those fiscal rules that she's set out to keep things in balance? Does the green spending then just get delayed again?
Look, you're absolutely right. We've had 12 interest rates rises since we announced our Green Prosperity Plan 18 months ago. Inflation is now running at 8.7%. The government crashed the economy and mortgages have gone up. I hope they don't do that again, but if they do that again, we will revise our plans. We're sticking to our fiscal rules.
OK, David Lammy, thank you very much. It's always great to have you in the studio. Labour there, of course, trying to maximise the Tories' pain, and the Cabinet Minister, Grant Shapps, trying desperately to move the conversation on. Let's move the conversation on to our panel. Michael Howard, I'm sure you were listening carefully. What did you think of what Mr Shapps said? I felt he was trying to say, yeah, Boris Johnson was basically not telling the whole truth on Friday in his explosive statement, but he was trying to move on. Did he manage?
Well, I think he did. Look, we're all under a disadvantage because we haven't seen the report of the Privileges Committee. We don't know what it says. And that is obviously going to be a very important report. It affects many of the questions that you put to Grant Shapps. It affects, for example, whether Boris Johnson could ever come back into the House of Commons. So we're all in the dark. We haven't seen the report. We can't form judgments on that.
We're pretty clear, though, that the report is going to say that he did not tell the whole truth, or else there would not have been this whole fiasco. And from conversations I have, that's certainly the direction of travel. Do you think that Boris Johnson should be allowed to stand for the Conservative Party again if he wanted to?
I don't think there's any question of his standing again in the immediate future. And as I say, what happens after that will depend, at least in part, on what the report says. It's an important report. I don't know what it says. Great respect, Laura. Even you don't know what it says.
I don't know everything, but everybody does know the direction of travel. I mean, Isabel, I put there those pieces of reporting that you shared with us this morning about Boris Johnson's allies' fury, really, that they feel Rishi Sunak has, I suppose, turned them over. Now, Grant Shapps did deny that had happened.
He was rather denying a different premise. I'm not sure he quite understood what was being claimed, which is that the names never actually got as far as the Commission. And I was interested that you appeared to have picked that up from your contacts as well. So I don't think we've got clarity really yet on whether that is the case or whether that is not the case. Two other things I took from the Shapps interview. He is not denying in that interview with you that the party would block Boris Johnson from attempting to stand again, for example, in a by-election or at the next election. And secondly, he's claiming that Boris doesn't want to come back. That is nonsense.
And what did you make listening to all of that?
The thing that I took away from it is that we're just rabbiting on about the House of Lords and these gifts.
Politics for you.
Yes, I know. But I'm a newbie. But that we're talking about, so much of the conversation is about whether or not someone was going to get a nice gift. It's like getting a tip at the end, giving a tip to your waiter at the end of a meal. Instead of a tip, it's a peerage and someone who's going to be for the rest of their life in control of laws that will affect the whole of the British people. That, to me, seems to be the problem, and just an archaic system we have. And I'm kind of horrified that Labour are going to do nothing to amend that or to even take steps to change it.
Well, I was going to ask you that. It's interesting because it is Labour policy, as David Lammy accepted, to get rid of the House of the Lords or have a good old look at it in the first time. But then he did say, but we quite fancy keeping the honour system.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what I think is the problem right now in British politics. You have the Conservative Party and you have kind of Conservative light with the Labour Party. And I've been people who, he talks about the ordinary people of this country. I think, where do they go? The working people who want a little more left-wing, they don't have an option anymore. And that to me is the kind of gaping hole, the black hole of British politics.
I think the corruption in the system is actually a lot worse than even we political journalists realise. I happened to be talking to a major Tory donor yesterday who told me in graphic terms how it is behind the scenes in these soirees that they have with big donors, where they will quite brazenly say, OK, I'll give you a few million, but you must give a nomination to my daughter, my wife, and so on. Absolutely shameless.
Michael Howard, is that fair?
No, it's not, because I used to be a member of the House of Lords Appointments Commission, HOLAC, which Grant had a bit of difficulty in getting his...
So it is HOLAC, right, OK, we've got that right.
No one can be appointed to a peerage unless they are approved by HOLAC, and HOLAC investigates that person's past and determines whether they are people of integrity who can make a contribution to the proceedings of the House of Lords.
Say that these people, some of the people who are going into the House of Lords in this are people who lied about Partygate and who were there at those parties. They're not...
and it's not just peerages, there's all the other things.
I don't think you can sustain that, not in terms of the people who are going into the House of Lords.
OK, well, more from you guys in a minute, but somebody who's not going into the HOLAC test, somebody who's not going into the House of Lords, at least as far as we know, is Nigel Farage, who, of course, is somebody whose position on Brexit pushed the Conservatives further and further. And whether you love him or hate him, there's no question that, like Boris Johnson, Nigel Farage has been a very influential figure. A bit earlier this morning, I caught up with him and asked him what he thought of the Conservatives' latest bout of chaos.
I think it's the end of Boris Johnson in the Conservative Party. I think all this talk of, he'll go for this seat or that seat. Well, hang on. He's virtually just gifted Uxbridge to the Labour Party. There's no way he's going to be given a seat. If he really wants to be in politics, he is going to have to be part of some sort of centre-right realignment. It's been talked about years ago. The referendum stopped it. The UKIP insurgency was getting to such a level that there was real talk about this happening. Now, is Johnson somebody who would want to be part of a new attempt to break the mould of British politics, or would he rather be on the after-dinner speaking circuit? So I look at reform, and I'm not actively involved in it at the moment, but I think the gap for another insurgency is actually bigger than it was 10 years ago.
And would you like to work with Boris Johnson to fill that gap?
Well, there are quite large differences between the two of us in terms of policy, be it net zero, be it his relaxed attitude towards net migration numbers. But on the really big issue of politics in the last few decades, Brexit, we were on the same side. And hey, I did help him quite a bit back in 2019. Yeah,
you made the way in many seats for the Conservatives to clean up in 2019.
And of course got rid of Mrs May, because that's what the European elections did. So look, I wouldn't rule anything in or anything out. I just don't know whether Boris really has the determination to go on.
But in terms of Boris Johnson's behaviour in the last few days, I mean, you've written in the Telegraph that you believe, as he claimed, that there is an establishment plot to reverse Brexit. Where's the evidence for that?
Oh, that started on June the 24th, 2016. It's been going on for 7 years. I mean, we just like America, we've been through the Russia hoax, that somehow Russia funded the whole campaign. That proved to be completely unfounded. Repeated attempts in Parliament to try to force a second referendum. And now what we see, particularly now with this government, where it was going to scrap thousands of EU laws, it hasn't done so.
But Nigel Farage, there is a Brexiteer Prime Minister. We have left the European Union. Yeah, Rishi Sunak is a Brexiteer.
I never saw him.
He's in charge. Well, he was on that side in the Leave campaign. We have left the European Union. There's a government with a big majority that could, if they wanted, go much further in terms of the changes that they want to make.
Well, that's the
They've
point.
chosen not to make that decision.
Yeah.
But it's not credible, is it, to say the decisions of Rishi Sunak add up to a plot to subvert Brexit?
Oh, I'm not saying Rishi Sunak himself is involved in a plot, but what we do know is the big corporates, elements of the media would love to reverse what happened with the Brexit referendum. And with Rishi Sunak, by not getting rid of EU law by not diverging makes it very easy for Keir Starmer to sign us straight back up to a single market.
Which, of course, he says and has said repeatedly that he will not do. But I wonder, you talk there about a kind of gap in the political market. Have any Conservative MPs been in touch with you saying they might be interested?
More than before. I think there are quite a lot of Conservative MPs right now who know they're going to lose their seats. The Red Wallers know they're going to lose their seats, as it is, running as Conservatives. And if there was a coming together on the centre-right, which is where the gap is, I think quite a few would.
How many then? You say more have been in touch with you before.
Potentially, double figures would not be hard to see.
You suggest that more than 10 Conservative MPs might be in the mood to walk away and join some kind of outfit with you?
Well, I think it needs to be more than just me. You know, I think, you know, you can have one person leading a party into a European election or something like that. A general election, you've got to have a range of talents. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what Boris Johnson's going to do. But I see a bigger gap for an insurgency today than it did before.
A bigger gap for an insurgency. What a fascinating prediction. We'll get into that in just a second. But for all you political pub quiz champions out there, you might have noticed it already. Grant Shapps said that Gordon Brown had a resignation honours list. In fact, he had a dissolution honours list, which actually gave rewards to members of all political parties. We like to make nerds happy on a Sunday morning, so that clarification is something you can entertain your friends and relatives with throughout the day. Michael Howard, you've been a participant and no doubt a sort of contemporary historian of the Conservative parties. You've lived and breathed it. Nigel Farage there is predicting that there could be some kind of new outfit along in any minute, and he says he's got MPs in double figures wanting to join. Do you believe him?
Nigel's making mischief, which he's very good at. Very good at. The truth is that we've got an election, as I was saying earlier, a year away, and at the end of that election, we are either going to have a Conservative government or a Labour government. And the point about the Conservative Party, the reason why I'm such a supporter of Rishi Sunak, as a Brexiteer, I campaigned for Brexit, is that the Conservative Party, the reason why it's the most successful political party in the world and has lasted longer than any other is because it's always been prepared to adapt its principles in a pragmatic way to the challenges that face the country at the moment. That is exactly what Rishi Sunak is doing.
Isabel, you were rolling your eyes and you were shaking your head.
This is extraordinarily arrogant to be talking about how the Conservative Party is the most successful party in the world. If you look at the state that our country is in right now, I would also take issue with saying after the next election there will be a Conservative government or a Labour government. I think it's very, very possible that there'll actually be a hung parliament, that there'll have to be a coalition. And at that point, you're in very interesting territory because the price of a coalition may well be that whoever is leading that coalition must offer proportional representation. And then we're going to break the mould and we won't be in a situation where people like you go on about how the Conservative Party is the most successful party in the world. What do you think?
I think that's not true.
Which bit of it?
Well, no, just the bit about the Conservative Party being the most successful party in the world.
Indeed.
I think clearly that's a fallacy.
It absolutely is true. You can look.
Because they've lasted long enough, you mean?
Yeah, well, I'm looking at it historically.
Successful at actually doing things is what most voters would want to measure it on.
Dealing with the challenges that the country faces at any particular time. It's absolutely.
And on any measure, you've failed on that front, on all the key things.
Not at all.
Look at the state of immigration.
Look, if you look at the challenges that our country has faced over the last
look at
few
the
years,
NHS, look at immigration.
Let me get a word in, Isabel.
Look at Brexit.
And then I want to hear from Alan. Michael.
We inherited an economy that had just coming out of the financial crash. We then had the pandemic. We now have a war on the continent of Europe.
But it has
no
been 13
recent government
years,
has ever
Michael
faced
Howard.
challenges.
It has been
of this
13
order.
years, and the Conservative Party, as we speak this morning, looks to many people, like Alan, I think, like things are not looking very successful.
Because
yes, I think that's true. And also, I think you talk about, we heard about Boris's perspective. That's your perspective. I don't think that is a perspective that is shared by the majority of people in this country right now at this moment. And I feel one of the things I'm taking from all these interviews is the question of Brexit and about how far they could have gone further. Is Rishi Sunak not going as far as he could? I just would like someone, and I was hoping that Nigel was going to be here in real life and not sneaking in the dark before us to do this interview.
I'm sure he'd have liked to have been here.
Well, perhaps we'll do that another time. Farage v Cumming.
I'd
Maybe
love
we'll
it.
have
I
that
just want to
conversation
tell
another
me some
time.
positive things about Brexit. We never seem to hear those.
Or
Well,
some
maybe we'll come
success
to
stories
Michael
about
with
the
that in a
Tories
few,
right
but we
now.
must end our conversation for now because we've still got plenty more to get
Okay.
in the show. So let's hear now from somebody else who has had a very interesting couple of months. This week we went to see Humza Yousaf, the new First Minister of Scotland. He's the SNP leader, of course, too, who said after all the fuss after the last 24 hours that Westminster is consumed with a third-rate political soap opera. Cue gags, of course, about the SNP's own dramas. A police investigation into the party's finances, a slide in the polls and frustrations among some of its members about whether they'll ever achieve independence. It was our first big interview with Mr Yousaf as First Minister, and we wanted to know if he'd stick to Nicola Sturgeon's plan to claim the next general election was, after all, an elusive second referendum in all but name.
Given the fact that we have a Westminster government that is denying us our mandate, denying the Scottish people their democratic choice, we'll absolutely use the next general election to further the cause of independence. So again, and nobody should ever be in any doubt that independence will be front and centre of our general election campaign.
You said it was on the table, but you clearly pointed out there were disadvantages with that.
Well, clearly, of course, our preferred option remains that referendum, that legally binding referendum, that gold standard that was agreed between two governments that were diametrically opposed to the issue of independence. If we're not able to express support for the proposition of independence through that legally binding referendum, we'll use the general election to do that.
So you will, to be completely clear, treat the next general election as if it were a referendum on independence, even though that would have no effect in law. It wouldn't force any UK government into doing anything. And you know very well that the Conservatives wouldn't see it that way, the Labour Party wouldn't see it that way, whether in Scotland or the rest of the UK. So you'd be on your own seeing it that way.
Well, look, again, I go back to the point. The preferred route for us, of course, is that legally binding referendum, that 2014...
But you know it's not going to happen, so let's put that aside for a second.
The reason why I'm mentioning that, of course, therefore, the only way to break that logjam, that impasse that you rightly describe, is by the power of the people. They can deny me all they want, the Westminster government, they can deny our First Minister all they want. They cannot continue to deny the people of Scotland. And that's why in the next electoral test, next national electoral test, that general election that will take place, very simply a vote for the SNP, and for me will be a vote for independence.
But do you accept, though, to SNP voters watching this who might be just as frustrated with you as you are, do you accept that a vote for independence in the context of a general election doesn't change anything? It would have no effect.
No, I don't agree that Westminster parties can continue to ignore the will of the Scottish people. They
can by law. You don't like it, but they can by law.
By law. But of course, what we will do and what we will seek to do is continue to ensure that we try to break that logjam through the power of the people.
Well, let's talk then about what the people want. Do you still believe there needs to be a consistent majority for independence before there were to be another referendum?
Yes.
And what does that actually translate into? So some people in your party used to say it would mean 6 months of backing for independence at over 60%. And actually, support has been falling back. So how do you define a consistent majority for independence?
Well, one day one poll will say that independence is above 50%, the poll the next day will tell us that it's lower than 50%. So we're there or thereabouts in relation to support for independence. I don't want to be there or thereabouts. I want to make sure that independence is a consistent, settled will. So at the moment, for example, it's pretty obvious that independence is not the consistent settled will of the Scottish people.
So what you're saying, it's obvious that right now there is not majority support for independence.
Look, first and foremost, we have that mandate for an independence referendum.
And
There's simply no doubt about that.
But what you've just said is there is no consistent majority for independence.
We are building that consistent support for independence, and that's what I'm absolutely focused on.
But it's interesting because in the last few minutes you've said, yes, there has to be a consistent majority in order to have a referendum.
No, in order to win a referendum.
If there isn't a consistent majority for independence, you've admitted that very candidly, where's your case for a referendum?
A case for a referendum is because we have stood on election after election after election saying that we believe that there should be another referendum on Scottish independence, and we have won election after election after election on that mandate.
You said recently it was realistic that there might be independence in 5 years. Is it realistic also that there might not be independence for more than 5 years?
Not if I've got anything to do with it.
Why do you think people would be persuaded that you know as a government what you're doing when you can't get ferries built? The health service has got significant problems. You can't work out a recycling scheme. You've had a huge row with the UK government about that. Business isn't happy. Taxpayers might now be on the hook for millions of pounds of compensation. So why would people who are not yet persuaded of the merits of the SNP be persuaded now when so many things are going wrong?
I think people would trust us because we have not just the best...
Because things are going wrong?
Because we don't just have the best paid staff in the NHS. We, of course, through our discussions, our negotiations, our good collaborative efforts with our trade union colleagues, we're the only country in the entire UK that avoided an NHS strike this winter. I think people will trust us because we've reduced that poverty-related attainment gap in education. I think people would trust us because we have more people, young people, from deprived backgrounds going into university education than ever before. I think people... I can go on for another 5-10 minutes if you want.
There are many things right now that voters in Scotland are deeply unhappy about your handling of, whether that is not being able to build ferries, stranding island communities, whether it is proposing a recycling scheme that business put up red flags about for months and has now been delayed until October 2025.
Well, let's just take that. Let's just take that deposit return scheme. I mean, that is just an example of, frankly, how devolution is becoming unworkable. We had regulations passed by the Scottish Parliament, which included glass within a deposit return scheme, only for the UK government at the 11th hour trying to sabotage that scheme. That is just another demonstration in a pattern of behaviour that we are battling against the UK government that is determined to undermine devolution.
Except many people in business in here in Scotland say actually it's not the UK government that sabotaged it. I mean, Tesco, for example, one of the biggest companies in the country, UK-wide, they wanted a much more joined-up approach. And the boss of the Scottish retail sector has said today the scheme's been bedevilled by a rush to unachievable dates and a failure to take on board businesses' reasonable and practical suggestions. That's on you.
No, let me address that point about business. We are asking, of course, the polluter to pay. So we are asking the producer to pay, as opposed to the taxpayer to pay for those broken glasses, the glass bottles that you see in your streets or your parks or your beaches. So I can understand where there would be some resistance from business.
Are you going to pay compensation to businesses who've lost out, who spent millions of pounds getting ready for a scheme that is now not going to happen?
We don't believe there's a case for the Scottish Government to need to compensate because the action we've had to take is because of that 11th hour last minute intervention from the UK Government, which has meant that a Scottish scheme unfortunately isn't viable.
It's been more than 2 months now since Nicola Sturgeon and the former party chief executive's home was searched. Prosecutors still haven't made any charges. Do you think that's a bit odd?
I really couldn't comment on a live police investigation. I mean, I understand why you asked the question. I don't think the question is an unreasonable one to ask, but as First Minister, I've got a really important duty not to be seen to prejudice or interfere in a live police investigation. I've had no intention of doing so.
But aside from that, though, it is a political mess. Are you sorry to SNP supporters, many of whom have pounded the pavements for you?
So what I can say to all of our party activists, members and supporters is I will give every ounce of effort and energy I have as leader of this party. And in that, they should be absolutely confident that despite having some of the most difficult weeks our party has probably faced, certainly in the modern era, that support for independence is still rock solid. It's a good base for us to build on. And I've got no doubt at all that I'll be the leader that will ensure that Scotland becomes an independent nation.
But for years, politicians around the UK have looked to the SNP as being, maybe with some envy, as this really impressive fighting force. And now you're a party that's been falling in the polls. There are deep questions about the government's competence and a police investigation. How have you let this happen?
Look, I know there will be people, be it their opposition, be it in the media, that have somehow written the SNP off already. They do that at their own peril.
Have you spoken to Nicola Sturgeon at all recently?
Yeah, I have. Mm-hmm.
Have you talked to her about what you're doing as a job? Or have you talked to her about what's happening in the investigation? Is she giving you tips?
Look, these are generally private conversations. I mean, she's been in Parliament now for a few weeks, so she and I have caught up on a couple of occasions. And look, I've been asking about her welfare. she has mentioned how difficult and traumatic those last few weeks have been.
Is she okay?
Yeah, she's in a good place and doing well, for sure. But also, yes, of course, why would I not want to get some advice from, I think, arguably one of the best politicians and most impressive politicians Europe has seen over the last couple of decades.
If Keir Starmer phoned you the morning after the election and he hadn't got an overall majority, but he was the biggest party, if he said, I need help, will you do a deal with me? What would you say?
I said, I'm prepared to do a deal with you because I want to see the back of the Tories. So I'll work with any party, frankly, that is progressive to see the back of the Tories.
What would the price be?
Well, the price, of course, the top of that list would be to have an independence referendum, because that, of course, allows us to free ourselves of a Westminster that has made Scotland and the UK one of the most unequal countries.
So that would be a deal breaker. You would not support Labour in a hung parliament unless Keir Starmer were to give you an independence referendum?
I don't think it's a massive surprise at all that if we were to cooperate with Labour, then having that independence referendum would be top of that
But would
list.
it be a deal breaker?
Well, look, I'm not going to get into negotiation with you 12 to 18 months before a general election. A single ballot has even been cast, or a date has even been announced.
Would you ever prop up a Conservative minority government?
Never.
So Labour doesn't then have to give you anything at all? But you're clear you'd never prop up the Tories. So whether or not you say you'd prop up the Labour Party, in reality you'd never prop up the Tories. So Labour doesn't have to offer you anything.
We would never prop up the Tories. But as somebody who's been part of government for a long time, and there were some tricky times when we were a minority government, you know, what you want as a government, particularly if you're coming in fresh as a new government, you want stability. You want to be able to get your budget through. You want to be able to get your legislative agenda through. You don't want frustrated at every single corner and every single turn. That's why the cooperation agreement we have with the Greens is frankly worth its weight in gold. So look, we would never prop up a Conservative government ever, and underline that and put that in bold. But of course, you know, if Labour do not want to cooperate with us, then we would make life very difficult for them.
You would. What do you mean by that?
Well, I've just mentioned the legislative process, I've mentioned budgets and so on and so forth.
On the other side, Alex Salmond has proposed an alliance of the independent supporting parties, including his own party. Would you consider the idea of an alliance? No.
Not in a general, no. We wouldn't, not in any election, but certainly, I mean, why would we need an alliance when we are by far the largest independence vehicle party in the country by quite some distance in a week?
Are your kids proud or embarrassed that their dad's got a big fancy new job?
Both. So my 4-year-old definitely is very proud and tells her whole nursery that her dad's the First Minister. I think my 14-year-old perhaps was a little bit more embarrassed at times, but no, they're so supportive, and it's a tricky adjustment.
Are they like swinging on the cart and sliding down the banisters in Butte House?
So my 4-year-old on her very first day in Butte House did stick her head through the banister, hence why we had to get some child adaptations done to Butte House immediately. My 14-year-old, in the true traditions, and I am going to embarrass her of being a typical teenager, has slammed 1 or 2 doors in Butte House already in the first few weeks.
What, the 19th century Georgian beautiful Charlotte Square
maybe
listed
don't
building?
tell historic Scotland that, actually.
First Minister, thank you so much for
Thanks so
giving
much.
us your time today. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you.
And I hope Humza Yousaf's teenage daughter isn't too mortified by her father confessing some of what's been going on under their roof. Alan, I know that you've been a supporter of independence.
Yes.
Do you think the party's kind of stuck, or do you feel confident now that you know what the plan is?
I do feel the party is stuck. I do feel the Scottish Parliament is stuck, actually. I would like to just sort of add to what Humza said there about the number of laws that are being passed by a democratically elected government unanimously in the Scottish Parliament that are being struck down by Westminster. Obviously the DRS, the trans bill before that. There's been many other things, and there's kind of these Brexit power grabs. I just think, imagine if laws were passed in Westminster unanimously and then another body struck them down. I guess that's the House of Lords. I guess that's what that does.
Do you think he has a plan that you find credible to get to independence?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think obviously they're going through a lot of trouble and readjustment right now.
It's one way of putting it.
Yeah, it is. But I mean, it's traumatic. It's traumatic for everybody. It's traumatic for the people of Scotland. But I think I think the plan for independence is based on the Westminster government respecting the will of not just the Scottish people, but the Scottish devolved Parliament.
Okay.
And I think that's a bigger issue, as well as the other devolved parliaments are not being respected and indeed being derided by Westminster.
Okay, well, there's sure to be a big talking point as we get closer to the general election. Let's talk about the plans for your new big show,
Yes.
A Strange Loop.
Yes.
Huge smash on Broadway. It's now about to start in London. We'll chat about it, but first I want to show you all a little clip.
I want to break the cycle that's so ingrained in me, but change comes way too slow and I am in a hurry. There's all of this rejection, which brings such misery, but with my white girl music, I drown out the flurry of today.
Now, it's won just about every award going. How did you get involved in this, and what's it all about?
Well, A Strange Loop is about that character there, Usher. He is a man called Usher, who is an usher at the Lion King, who's writing a musical about a man called Usher, who is an usher at the Lion King. So that's, you get it, A Strange Loop. And I became involved because the guy who originally played that role off-Broadway was a performer at my cabaret club. I have a club in New York called Club Cumming, and he was called Larry Owens, and he was the original Usher. And one day I went to my bar and said, is Larry on tonight? I went, no, he's got a job and some musical. He's not going to be here for a few weeks. I was kind of annoyed. So I went to see A Strange Loop, really, to support Larry. And then I was blown away by it. It is this brilliant work. Obviously, it's won the Pulitzer. It's not just me saying it's brilliant, but a brilliant, clever, entertaining, hilarious, all those things, but also a show about stuff that I didn't really understand and was so delighted to find out about blackness, about queerness, and about the whole kind of black experience, and it's genius.
What have you learned from it then? Because if it's about the black experience, and then you're a white man promoting it.
I'm a privileged white man promoting it.
Yeah.
That's one of the issues, actually. But I came on board as an investor initially, then as a producer, because I feel that, sadly, one of the things, when there is a black story with black performers, I think the rest of us don't think that's for us. And I'm here to say that more white people need to go to those shows and to learn and to support and to advocate and to be an ally. But actually, for me, I hope my involvement in it will broaden the demographic and more people will see this incredible piece of
You sound
theatre.
a bit like it's changed your experience of working on the show.
It really has. I feel like I've learned so much about, a lot about the perception of black people in our culture. And there's some hilarious bits in the show when Tyler Perry is roasted mercilessly about the kind of tropes and the stereotypes that he promotes from within the black community. So things like that I had no idea about, and it's just it's a brilliant piece of work. And Michael R. Jackson, who wrote it, who's hilarious, and his Instagram handle is The Living Michael Jackson. He is an incredible. It's so personal and idiosyncratic, but yet it's huge and massive and talks about the political landscape too. It's awe-inspiring.
Okay, well, part of that political landscape, I'm afraid, is people getting a bit of a roasting every now and again. As a former leader of the Tory party, Michael, I want to give the final word to you. If you had to bet on it, would you see Boris Johnson back in Parliament in our lifetimes?
I think it would be very difficult.
Okay. Michael, thank you very much indeed. Isabel, thank you very much indeed. Alan, thank you very much indeed for joining us this weekend after a couple of days of huge political news. The title of Alan's show, A Strange Loop, might be exactly what some Tories feel they've been stuck in, wondering if Boris Johnson leaving Parliament really is the end. But this week's drama might, of course, not make a blind bit of difference to who you'll vote for next year. But maybe you feel, if you still back him, that he is some great hero in an unfair tragedy. But perhaps you're a different kind of Conservative, frustrated at the different tragedy that so much time has been spent on arguments about him. Or maybe if you've deplored Boris Johnson's conduct, his effect on the country is for you a tragedy of another sort. The return he's dangled does seem far-fetched right now, but only a fool would ever say never when it comes to Mr. Johnson. But maybe it is hard to be a populist if the polls suggest you might not be very popular anymore. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. It's always such a pleasure to have your company. Head to iPlayer for more if you want to watch anything again. But if not, I'll look forward to seeing you here, same time, same place next week. Who knows, after all, what might have happened by then. Goodbye.